The rain poured relentlessly, blanketing the streets of Chicago in a cold, unyielding cascade. Lucas Harper, a renowned architect, sat behind the wheel of his sleek silver sedan, the rhythmic thrum of the windshield wipers blending with the constant hum of his thoughts. The clock on the dashboard read 8:17 p.m., its glowing digits counting down to an important presentation that could redefine his career. Lucas rehearsed key points in his mind, lips moving silently as he navigated the rain-slicked streets. His profession demanded precision, and tonight's pitch was no exception. The world outside blurred into streaks of light and shadow, his focus narrowing to the road ahead. Then he saw her. Under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp stood a woman, her soaked hair plastered against her pale face. She clutched a small child wrapped in a threadbare blanket, shielding the girl as best as she could from the downpour. Her shoulders trembled, her thin frame a silhouette of exhaustion and desperation. Lucas's fingers tightened on the wheel. The logical part of him urged him to keep driving. His meeting was too important to miss. But as he glanced again at the frail figure, he knew he couldn't leave her behind. Lucas's car slowed to a crawl as his thoughts wrestled with the choice before him. The green light flickered ahead, urging him to move forward. But his gaze remained fixed on the woman and the child. A wave of muddy water splashed onto the sidewalk as another car sped past her, forcing her to recoil and clutch the child closer. His jaw tightened as conflicting thoughts raced through his mind. "You don't have time for this," he muttered. Yet, the image of the woman shielding her child against the relentless rain refused to leave his mind. With a deep sigh, he eased off the accelerator, the decision already made before he fully realized it. Lowering the passenger side window, Lucas was met with the sharp sting of rain. "Excuse me," he called out, raising his voice above the downpour. "Do you need help?" The woman turned her head slowly, her wide, wary eyes meeting his. Her arms instinctively tightened around the child, as if shielding her from an unseen danger. I don't," she stammered, her voice barely audible. Lucas glanced at the child. The girl stirred slightly in her mother's arms, letting out a soft, plaintive cry. The sight pulled at something deep within him. "You can't stay out here," he said firmly, though his tone was kind. "Please, get in. It's too dangerous." For a moment, the woman hesitated, her drenched frame shaking from the cold. Her eyes darted to the empty street before flickering back to Lucas. Finally, her resolve seemed to break. She stepped forward with stiff, deliberate movements, as if any sudden motion might shatter her. Lucas quickly leaned across to open the door. He grabbed a jacket from the passenger seat and draped it over her shoulders as she climbed in, careful not to disturb the child. Water pooled around her feet on the pristine floor mat, but Lucas didn't care. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Lucas nodded, shifting the car into gear. "Let's get you somewhere safe." The car's heater hummed to life, gradually pushing back the chill as Lucas drove through the rain-soaked streets. He cast quick glances at the woman beside him. Her hands gripped the edges of his jacket tightly, knuckles white, while the child rested silently against her chest, her small face barely visible through the damp folds of the blanket. "What's your name?" Lucas asked, his voice breaking the silence. The woman hesitated, her gaze fixed on the passing streetlights. "Laura," she said quietly. "And this is Mia." "Laura?" Lucas repeated, as if testing the name. "I'm Lucas. We're heading to the hospital first. Mia should be checked out." Laura's head snapped toward him, her face a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. "You don't have to do that," she murmured. "We'll be fine." "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Lucas replied firmly. "I'd feel better knowing she's okay." Laura said nothing more, but the tension in her shoulders remained. When they reached the hospital, Lucas stepped out into the rain without hesitation, ignoring the cold drops that soaked through his clothes. He opened the passenger door and extended a hand to Laura, who hesitated before taking it. Inside, the warm glow of the hospital lights felt almost foreign after the storm's relentless gloom. A nurse approached, her gaze softening as she took in Laura's disheveled state, and Mia's small, swaddled figure. Lucas stayed nearby, watching as the nurse gently guided Laura and Mia into an examination room. He sat in the lobby, his foot tapping anxiously against the tile floor. The sterile smell of antiseptic and the distant hum of monitors only heightened his unease as the minutes dragged on, endlessly. When Laura returned, cradling a now calmer Mia, she muttered another faint, "Thank you." Lucas shook his head. "You're not staying out there tonight. I'll take you to my place. It's safe, and you'll have time to figure things out." The drive to Lucas's apartment was quiet, the city's chaos muffled by the steady drum of rain on the car roof. Laura sat in the passenger seat, her hands never leaving Mia's blanket. Lucas could sense the hesitation emanating from her, but he didn't press. When they arrived at his building, Laura hesitated again, her gaze lingering on the modern glass structure. "This is your home?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with disbelief. Lucas nodded, opening the car door. "It's not much," he said with a faint smile, downplaying the grandeur of the apartment towering above them, "but it's warm and dry." Inside, Laura's unease was palpable as she glanced around the spacious living room. She shifted Mia in her arms, her fingers clutching the child protectively. Lucas grabbed a blanket from a nearby couch and handed it to her. "You can stay here until you figure things out," he said, his tone steady and non-intrusive. "Take all the time you need." Laura hesitated, then finally spoke, her words halting. "I don't know how to thank you. No one's ever done something like this for us." "You don't have to thank me," Lucas replied simply. "Everyone needs help sometimes." Her shoulders sagged and she sank onto the couch, Mia still asleep in her arms. After a moment of silence, she began to speak, her voice trembling. "We've been running," she said. "From Mia's father, Mark." Lucas's brows furrowed, but he stayed quiet, letting her continue. "He wasn't always like this," Laura murmured. "But he started gambling, drinking. When things got bad, he turned to anger." Her breath hitched. "When Mia was born, I thought he'd change. For a moment, I thought he was changing. He was kind, attentive, almost like the man I fell in love with. But it didn't last. The anger came back worse than ever until it felt like there was no escape. And then I knew I had to leave. For Mia. I couldn't let her grow up like that." Lucas watched as tears welled in her eyes, her grip on Mia tightening. "You did what you had to do," he said gently. "For her." Laura nodded, her voice a whisper. "But he won't stop looking for us." Lucas's jaw tightened. "He won't hurt you. Not while you're here." A few days later, as Laura settled into Lucas's apartment, she began to regain a sense of normalcy. Lucas, ever pragmatic, handed her his credit card one evening after returning from work. "For anything you and Mia need," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Laura hesitated, staring at the card as if it were a foreign object. "I can't take this," she said, her voice shaking. "You can and you will," Lucas replied firmly. "This isn't charity, it's for Mia. She deserves to have what she needs." Laura's eyes brimmed with gratitude and reluctance, but she eventually accepted the card. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching it tightly. That night, while Mia slept soundly in her makeshift crib, Laura felt an unshakable need to step outside for air. The walls of Lucas's apartment, though warm and secure, seemed to close in on her, as memories of her past crept back. She slipped on her coat and quietly left, walking toward the nearby park. It was there that Mark found her. His silhouette emerged from the shadows, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. "Laura?" he said smoothly, his voice laced with venom. "You've been hiding well, but you knew I'd find you." Laura froze, clutching her coat tightly. "Leave us alone, Mark," she said, her voice firm but trembling. Mark stepped closer, his grin widening. "Not until I get something out of this mess. Give me what you have, or I'll take Mia. I'm sure you don't want that." Tears streamed down Laura's face as she reached into her pocket and pulled out Lucas's credit card. "Take it. Just leave us alone." Mark snatched the card with a sneer and disappeared into the night. The next morning, Lucas's phone buzzed with an alert. Unusual activity on his card. His stomach sank as he scanned the transactions. Electronics, luxury goods, all purchased the night before. Confronting Laura that evening, Lucas kept his voice calm but firm. "Why is my card being used for these purchases?" Laura's face crumbled as she broke down in tears. "Mark found me," she admitted. "He threatened to take Mia. I didn't know what else to do." Lucas's jaw tightened. "You should have told me. We'll deal with this. Together." The calm didn't last long. 2 nights later, Lucas woke to the sound of shattering glass echoing through his apartment. His heart raced as he grabbed his phone to check the security cameras. On the feed, he saw 3 men forcing their way into the building's side entrance. Mark was among them. Lucas quickly threw on a jacket and rushed toward Laura's room. He found her sitting upright on the couch, clutching Mia, her eyes wide with fear. "Stay here," he said urgently. "Lock the door and don't open it for anyone but me." Laura nodded, her trembling hands pulling Mia closer. Lucas stepped into the hallway, his mind racing. He grabbed a heavy umbrella from the corner, the closest thing to a weapon he could find, and moved toward the front door. The intruders didn't waste time. The door to the apartment burst open, and Mark strode in, flanked by 2 other men. His expression was smug as he scanned the space. "Where are they?" Mark sneered. "Not here," Lucas said, stepping forward, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "You've made a mistake coming here." Mark chuckled darkly. "The mistake was thinking you could protect them from me." The first man lunged at Lucas and chaos erupted. The fight was brutal. Lucas swung the umbrella with all his strength, catching one of the men across the face. But the odds were against him. A second attacker landed a punch to Lucas's ribs, sending him stumbling into the coffee table. In the bedroom, Laura pressed her ear to the door, Mia bundled tightly in her arms. Tears streamed down her face as she heard the sounds of the struggle. Desperation surged within her, mingling with a fierce determination she didn't know she had. Her eyes darted around the room until they landed on a heavy lamp on the bedside table. Grabbing it with trembling hands, she braced herself for what was to come. When Mark pushed into the room moments later, Laura acted on instinct. She swung the lamp with all her might, striking him squarely on the head. Mark staggered back, cursing, giving Lucas just enough time to regain his footing. Police sirens blared in the distance, growing louder by the second. One of the intruders panicked and fled. Moments later, officers stormed the apartment, subduing the remaining attackers. Laura sank to the floor, clutching Mia, as tears of relief and exhaustion poured down her face. Lucas, battered but alive, knelt beside them. "It's over," he said softly, his voice hoarse. "You're safe now." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the large windows of Lucas's apartment, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous night. The apartment was quieter now, though traces of the struggle lingered. A broken coffee table, scattered belongings, and bruises that both Lucas and Laura bore. Lucas sat at the dining table, a cup of coffee in his hand. Across from him, Laura cradled Mia, who cooed softly, blissfully unaware of the danger they had just escaped. "Thank you," Laura said, her voice steady despite the weariness in her eyes. Lucas looked up, his expression firm but kind. "You don't need to thank me. You did what you had to for Mia, and I'll always help you do that." Laura nodded, her gaze drifting to the window, where the city stretched out before them. For the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope, a future not defined by fear. "I've been thinking," she began hesitantly. "It's time I start rebuilding. I can't keep running. I want Mia to grow up feeling safe, to have a real life." Lucas smiled faintly. "You will, and you won't have to do it alone." Months passed, and life for Laura and Mia began to transform. With Lucas's unwavering support, Laura secured a part-time job at a local bookstore, a quiet refuge where she rediscovered her confidence. Mia, now more curious and playful than ever, brought joy to every corner of Lucas's apartment, her laughter echoing like music. Lucas, despite his demanding schedule as an architect, always prioritized time with them. They shared dinners filled with warmth, afternoons in the park, and quiet evenings reading bedtime stories to Mia. Gradually, Lucas's home became more than just a sanctuary. It became a shared space of comfort and belonging. One crisp autumn evening, Lucas invited Laura to sit with him on the balcony. The skyline stretched before them, a sea of twinkling lights against the fading twilight. "You've done so much for us," Laura said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I'll never be able to repay you." Lucas turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You've already repaid me, Laura. You've brought something into this place that was missing: life, laughter, and family." Laura looked down, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I've been thinking," Lucas continued, leaning forward. "This apartment, it's not just mine anymore, it's ours, and I want it to stay that way." Her brows furrowed in confusion. "Lucas, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," he said with a gentle smile, "I want you and Mia to stay, permanently. This is your home too, if you want it to be." Laura's breath hitched as tears welled in her eyes. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Lucas reached over, covering her hand with his. "I've never been more sure of anything." Laura nodded, her voice trembling. "We'd love to stay." As Mia toddled over moments later, giggling as Lucas scooped her up, Laura smiled through her tears. For the first time, she truly felt like they had found a home. 2 years had passed since the night Lucas brought Laura and Mia into his life, and their world had transformed into something neither of them could have imagined. The once pristine apartment was now filled with signs of a thriving family: crayon drawings on the fridge, toys scattered in the living room, and the sound of Mia's giggles echoing through the halls. Laura had grown into her new life with confidence and grace. She had transitioned from her part-time job at the bookstore to managing it full-time, finding joy in curating stories for others while writing a new chapter of her own. Mia, now 5 years old, adored Lucas and often followed him around, mimicking his every move as he worked on architectural sketches. One sunny spring morning, Lucas suggested a picnic at the park, a favorite family tradition. They spread a blanket under a sprawling oak tree, Mia running in circles, chasing butterflies. As Laura unpacked the basket, Lucas took her hand. "I have something to say," he began, his tone warm yet nervous. Laura looked up, her brow furrowing slightly. "What is it?" Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught as he opened it, to reveal the delicate diamond ring. "Laura," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "you and Mia have changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You've made this place a home, and you've made me a better man. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Laura's cheeks as she brought her hands to her mouth, overwhelmed by emotion. Her voice trembled as she finally found the words. "Yes, Lucas. 1,000 times yes." She reached for his hand, her heart bursting with joy and relief. Mia ran over, confused but excited by their sudden embrace. "What's happening?" she asked, giggling as Lucas lifted her into his arms. "Oh, big happy family," Lucas said with a grin, kissing Mia's forehead. A year later, their family grew even larger with the arrival of their son, Ethan. As Lucas held the baby boy in his arms, with Mia perched beside him, Laura smiled through happy tears. They had come so far, and now their future was brighter than ever. As Lucas and Laura watched Mia chase butterflies in the garden, with baby Ethan gurgling in Lucas's arms, the warmth of their journey filled the air. Their story reminds us that even in the darkest times, love, kindness, and second chances can light the way to a brighter future. If this story touched your heart, let it be the beginning of something beautiful. Help us spread more hope and inspiration by joining our community. Click subscribe and turn on notifications to ensure you don't miss out on more heartfelt stories like this one. Together, we can create a space where every story uplifts, inspires, and reminds us that brighter days are always ahead. Thank you for being part of this journey, and we'll see you in the next story.